The sun hadn't even risen above the ridge when Jesse Markham stepped into the barn. His boots crunched on cold hay. The frost hadn't lifted yet, and the wood of the old structure groaned like it resented another winter. Everything felt heavier that season. Not just the cattle feed or the broken fence he hadn't gotten around to fixing, but the weight of holding on. Holding on to a ranch too dry to grow, too forgotten to matter. Jesse had once dreamed of making something out here. A place passed down. A name respected. But after 3 years of drought and 2 loans he could barely read the fine print on. All he had left were 12 stubborn cows, a tired horse named Boone, and a house that creaked with every step like it remembered better days. He didn't say much, never had, but every morning he muttered the same thing under his breath: just get through today. And so far it had been barely enough. That morning he rode out before breakfast, checking fence lines, hoping for signs of movement in the pastures. What he didn't expect was to find movement in the brush. At first he thought it was an animal. A rustle, a snapped branch. Then he saw the boots. One off, the other barely hanging on. A trail of blood. And just beyond a fallen cottonwood, a figure lay slumped in the dirt. A person! He dismounted fast. The stranger, a woman, was breathing, barely. Dust clung to her skin like she'd been walking for miles. Her hair was tangled, face bruised, a fresh cut streaked across her forehead. Her clothes were torn, but not indecent, just weather-worn and soaked through with travel and injury. Jesse crouched beside her, heart thudding. "Hey," he said softly. "You alive?" She groaned, tried to lift her head. "Don't take me back!" He froze. Back where? Her eyes fluttered. Then she passed out. He could have left her, could have ridden into town and let someone else deal with it. But Jesse Markham had never been the kind of man who looked away. So he lifted her, light, far too light for someone her age, and laid her across Boone's saddle, careful not to jostle the wound at her side. As he turned toward the ranch, he muttered aloud, "Well, stranger, I guess we both got nowhere else to go." Back at the cabin, he laid her on his bed, lit a fire, boiled water, did what he could with the rough supplies he had: whiskey for cleaning, cloth for wrapping, and silence for comfort. She didn't wake for hours. But when she did, just before dusk, her eyes met his across the shadows of the room. "Where am I?" she rasped. "Safe," Jesse said. She tried to sit up, winced. "Who are you?" He poured water into a cup and handed it to her. "Jesse Markham, I own this place." She took the cup, her hands trembling. Then she looked him in the eye and said, "I don't remember who I am." The fire crackled in the hearth, painting soft gold across the rough cabin walls. Jesse crouched near it, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. He'd sat like that for over an hour, quiet, still, watching the woman sleep, her breathing uneven but alive. Outside, the sky deepened into dusk. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the hills, but Jesse didn't move. When the woman stirred again, her eyes fluttered open, cautious, dark, and fogged like a window on a frosted morning. "You're still here," she murmured. "I live here," Jesse said simply. "You're the one just passing through." She blinked, then glanced down at the quilt covering her. Her hands touched her ribs, gently, curiously. "You stitched me?" He nodded. "Best I could. You were bleeding when I found you. Side looked like it caught a blade." Her brows pinched, but not from pain. "I can't remember how," she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then, "You said something before you passed out, something about not going back." Her gaze sharpened. "Did I?" "Yeah." She looked toward the fire, lips pressed in a tight line. Then, barely audible, "I don't remember that either." Jesse stood and walked to the counter, poured a ladle of stew from the pot he'd kept warm. He set it on the table near her. "Eat first, we'll figure out the rest later." She sat up slowly, wincing with every movement. "I don't have a name," she said as she took the spoon. Jesse pulled out a chair, sat down across from her. "Then I guess you'll just have to borrow one," he said. She looked at him. "I can't just—" "It ain't forever," he added. "Just something to call you until you find the rest of yourself." After a long pause, she set the spoon down. "What would you call me?" Jesse studied her. The way she sat straight, despite the pain. The strength behind the fear. The way she watched everything, like the world had once tried to trick her and she was waiting for it to try again. He said, "Claire." She blinked. "Why?" "My mother's name. Only person I ever knew who didn't run when things got hard." Claire nodded once, the sound of her name sinking into the silence like a seed into soil. "Then Claire it is." That night, Jesse gave her the bed and slept on a roll by the fire. Claire barely moved, lost in fitful sleep. But sometime after midnight, Jesse heard her whispering, soft and scared. "No, no, not again." And though she didn't wake, her hand reached out in the dark. He didn't touch it. But he stayed close, just in case she needed someone when the morning came. The sun rose behind a thin veil of clouds, painting the distant ridgeline in pale gold. Jesse was already outside, shoveling feed and checking the fence line. The land didn't stop for anything. Not storms, not lost memory, not wounded strangers in the night. But today, something in the air felt different, lighter. Claire woke to the sound of boots on wood and the smell of coffee. She sat up slowly, her body still aching, but no longer screaming. Jessie had left a cup on the table for her, along with a folded flannel shirt. It swallowed her frame, but the warmth was welcome. She stepped out onto the porch a few minutes later, blinking at the pale morning light. Jessie stood by the corral, one boot propped on the rail, tossing hay to the cattle like he'd done it every day of his life. Because he had. "You get any sleep?" he asked without looking at her. "Enough," she said, then added, "I think." "You remembered anything else?" She shook her head. "Still just shadows." "Shadows are a start." She watched him a moment. "You don't ask a lot of questions." Jessie shrugged. "You'll tell me what you need to when you're ready." That silence, the kind that once made her feel hunted, felt oddly safe in his voice. After breakfast, Claire insisted on helping. "I'm not made for sitting still," she said. "You're still healing." "I'd rather hurt with a purpose." So Jessie gave her the lighter chores, brushing down the horses, sorting dry kindling, folding laundry that flapped in the cold wind. She moved slowly but steadily, stubborn in the same way Jessie respected most. By midday, she leaned against the porch post, wind in her hair, hands cracked from work. "You said this place was yours," she asked. "Always been?" He paused, then nodded. "My father's before me, and his before that. Markham Ranch. What's left of it?" Claire studied the land, dry, cracked, but standing, like Jessie himself. "You ever think of leaving it?" she asked. He looked up. "Every day." "And why don't you?" He met her eyes, calm and steady. "Because it still needs me." Claire looked down at her hands. "I think I know what that feels like." That night, she helped chop carrots for stew. Her laugh surprised them both when Jessie accidentally dropped the knife, hitting the floor with a clang and nearly taking the bowl with it. "Guess I'm not good with guests," he muttered, cheeks red. Claire smiled. "And I'm not used to being anyone's guest." Later, as the fire dimmed and she sat curled under the old quilt, Claire looked over at Jessie where he rested near the hearth. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not treating me like a ghost." Jessie looked at her, eyes tired but warm. "You're not a ghost," he said. "You're just lost. Ghosts don't bleed, and they don't look at the world like it might still give something back." Claire blinked hard, then whispered, "Maybe I'm starting to believe it could." The wind picked up again 2 days later, sharp and dry, carrying dust across the paddocks. Jessie nailed the shutters down tight, while Claire gathered the linens off the line before they could whip away. It wasn't a storm, not yet, but something was shifting in the air. The kind of shift that warns a man. Someone might come looking. Claire had been walking stronger, though her side still pulled when she bent too far. Her memory hadn't returned, not in names or faces, but in flashes, but in a barn, a voice shouting, the scrape of boots over wooden floors, the slam of a door, and the rush of cold air as she fled into the dark. She didn't tell Jessie all of that. Not yet. Instead, she asked about the land, about the ranch, about how Jessie kept it going alone. He answered in short phrases, always more comfortable in work than talk. But his words began to stretch as the days grew longer. "I used to think this place would bury me," he told her one evening, both of them watching the cattle graze under a darkening sky. "Now, I think it might have been waiting." Claire looked at him. "Waiting for what?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Someone who saw more than dead grass and rusted gates." They shared dinner on the porch that night. Beans, cornbread, and boiled coffee. Simple, but shared. As the sun dipped below the western ridge, Claire leaned back in the old rocker. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked. Jessie shook his head. "Regret's a waste of sweat." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something a stubborn man says." "I've been called worse." They both smiled. Just before bed, Jessie pulled out an old map from the drawer. Yellowed, worn. He laid it on the table. "This was my father's," he said. "Shows all the land before the border moved, before the wells dried, before everyone else packed up and left." Claire traced the faded ink with one finger. "Why show me this?" He looked her in the eye. "Because I don't want it to be the only one who remembers it was ever here." Claire stared at the map, then at the man across from her. And something inside her, some lost, fractured part, felt anchored, like she wasn't just passing through anymore, like she was being written into the story. That night, as the wind howled against the shutters, Claire dreamed again. But this time she wasn't running. She was standing still, in front of a man whose face she couldn't yet see. And she wasn't afraid. The morning came with silence. Not the peaceful kind Jessie was used to, but a stillness that felt like the woods holding its breath. Even the birds seemed to wait. Claire stood at the edge of the porch, Jessie's old coat draped around her shoulders. Her hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. "I heard a rider," she said softly. Jessie stepped beside her. "You sure?" She nodded. "Far off, hoofbeats, slow, like someone looking, not just passing." He stared out towards the ridge, where nothing yet moved. "We best be ready then." By midday, the rider hadn't shown. But Claire couldn't shake the weight behind her ribs. The one that said danger had a shape, and it was inching closer. She stood in the barn, brushing Boone, when Jessie approached. You remember something else? Claire didn't turn. Not clearly, but I know someone was chasing me. You think it's the same person? I think I ran for a reason. She finally looked at him. I just don't know if I was running from something or towards something. That afternoon, Jesse walked the fence again, rifle slung over his shoulder. Claire stayed behind, splitting kindling with steady hands. The ranch had grown quiet again, but in that quiet, new questions lived. Who was she really? What had happened before she collapsed by that fallen cottonwood? And what would happen if the past found her? That night, Jesse sat on the porch sharpening his blade by lantern light. Claire stepped out beside him, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed him one. It's weak. He took it anyway. Doesn't have to be strong, just hot. They sat together in the glow of that little flame, wind tugging gently at the trees. Claire wrapped her hands around her cup. If someone comes asking, she said slowly, what will you tell them? Jesse looked up. That depends. On what? On what you want me to tell them. A long pause. Then she whispered, I want to stop running, but I don't know how. Jesse set his cup down. Then maybe it's time you learned. He stood and walked down the steps, turning toward the barn. Come on, he called back. You're going to learn to shoot. Claire blinked. Now? He smiled. There's no better time than when it's quiet. That night, under a sky full of stars and silence, Jesse taught her how to hold a rifle, how to steady her breath, how not to blink when the world tried to shake her hands. And as Claire hit the old post 3 times in a row, she laughed out loud, surprised, fierce, and alive. For the first time since waking in his bed, she felt like maybe this land could be hers too. The days passed with a quiet urgency. Claire helped Jesse repair the west fence, cooked breakfast while he saddled Boone, and practiced shooting near the creek bed every afternoon. She still didn't know her real name, but she was learning how to carry herself like someone who belonged. Jesse noticed it in the way she moved, shoulders no longer curled in defense, hands steadier, her voice clearer. The ranch hadn't changed much, but she had, and so had he. One evening, just after sunset, Jesse returned from the northern ridge with his hat pulled low and his jaw tight. Claire met him at the corral. You saw something. Smoke, he said. Campfire? He nodded. Too close to be coincidence. Claire's lips parted. Then someone's looking. Could be a drifter, he said, though he didn't believe it. Could be worse. Jesse didn't argue. That night, they sat on the cabin floor, the map between them. Jesse traced a path with his finger. If they're watching from here, we'll see them by midday tomorrow. Claire nodded. What do we do until then? Jesse looked at her carefully. You decide. She blinked. Me? I can protect this land. I can fight if I have to, but I won't choose for you whether we stand or disappear. Claire sat back, silent, then said softly, I'm tired of running. They stayed. The next day, the air felt thick. No smoke, no riders, but the waiting itself was heavy. Claire stood at the porch with Jesse's rifle in her arms, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. By noon, she saw the figure. One rider, alone, slow. He didn't come armed, at least not visibly, but her stomach turned cold. The rider stopped at the edge of the fence and called out, Looking for a woman, he said. Small, wounded, might go by Claire. Jesse stepped out of the barn, calm as stone. Ain't got no Claire here. The man smirked. Funny. This ranch matches the description she was last seen near. Claire watched from behind the door, heart pounding. Jesse's voice didn't change. You lost, friend? The man shifted in his saddle. She took something that didn't belong to her. Someone wants it back. Jesse didn't blink. Then maybe someone ought to think about what they really own. A long silence. Then the rider tipped his hat. Message received. And he turned and left. Claire rushed out once he was gone. Why didn't you let me talk? Because you don't owe him anything, Jesse said. But what if he comes back? Then he'll see this place doesn't scare easy. Claire stared at him, something breaking and building at once in her chest. You could have turned me in. Jesse stepped closer. I could have, he said. But I've seen the kind of man who'd send someone like him looking. He touched her cheek, light, steady. And I believe the kind of woman who'd rather face a gun than forget who she really is deserves to be protected. That night, Claire sat alone by the fire. She stared into the flames and whispered to herself, My name might not be Claire, but whoever I was before, she didn't make it out here. I did. The rider didn't return that night, or the next. But the question he left behind hung heavy in the air. What had Claire taken? And why had someone wanted her brought back? Not rescued, but retrieved. Jesse didn't ask her to explain, but he didn't need to. Because 2 nights after the rider came, Claire sat down at the table and spoke first. I think I remember him, she said. Jesse looked up from sharpening a blade, silent. He worked for a man in Santa Rosa, a rancher, rich, the kind of rich that owns deputies and land and people. Jesse leaned forward, slow. You worked for him? Claire shook her head. I think I was with him. I think I was supposed to marry him. Jesse's jaw clenched. I didn't love him, she added. I don't even think I liked him. But he made it sound like I didn't have a choice. She reached into the pocket of Jesse's coat, now hers, and pulled out a folded scrap of paper she hadn't remembered finding until earlier that day. On it, a faded ledger list, names and figures. Beside one name, hers maybe, was a note. Paid in full. I think he bought me, Jessie, she said softly. I think I ran before the wedding. Jessie said nothing for a long time. Then, that don't make you his. I know, she whispered, but it scares me how close I came to believing I was. Later that night, Jessie stood at the porch while the wind curled around the house. Claire stepped beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and said, I don't want to run anymore, but I can't let that man find me again. Jessie looked at her. Then we make this land harder to reach than anything he owns. Claire raised a brow. You saying you'll fight him? He nodded. She searched his face. Even if I never remember my full name? Even if I don't become anyone but who I am right now? Jessie turned fully toward her, steady and sure. I don't care what name you used to have. The only thing that matters is the one you earn here. The next morning, Jessie started digging a second well. Not for water, but to make it known, this place was growing again, expanding, claiming the land that had once been written off. And Claire? She rode out with Boone to the eastern trail, alone but unafraid. She planted a stone with no carving at the base of the cottonwood where Jessie had first found her. I may never know who I buried here, she said aloud, but whoever she was, I survived for her. And from then on, when Jessie called her Claire, she didn't flinch, because maybe it wasn't her old name, but it was one she'd chosen. And that finally was enough. The days turned warmer. Spring pushed through the dry ground, coaxing color back into the hills. Wildflowers bloomed along the creek bed, and the cattle grazed just a little farther from the fence line. And in the small cabin at the edge of the Markham Ranch, 2 people moved with a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like living. Jessie taught Claire how to mend tack, how to spot sick calves early, how to tell a storm by the smell of the air. Claire, in turn, fixed his crooked cabinet doors, lined the shelves with jars of dried herbs, and painted the porch rail in soft, earthy green. They didn't speak of the man in Santa Rosa again, not because they forgot, but because there was nothing left to say. One afternoon, while planting a row of beans behind the barn, Jessie looked up and said, I've been thinking. Claire wiped her hands on her skirt. That sounds dangerous. He smirked. What if we made this official? She straightened. Official how? Jessie stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Not with papers, he said. Not with a preacher. Then after a pause, just with a place, your name on the gate beside mine. Claire's breath caught. Claire Markham? If you want it. She stepped toward him, close enough to feel the heat from his sunburnt skin. I don't know if that's who I was meant to be, she whispered. Jessie looked into her eyes, steady as ever. Maybe not, he said, but maybe it's who you chose to be. That evening, Jessie carved a new sign from cedar, Markham, etched in clean letters. Beside it, he added another name, slightly smaller, but just as bold. Claire. No last name, just the one that stayed. Later that night, they sat beneath the stars, side by side on the porch swing. Whiskey, their old hound, rested at their feet, his tail twitching softly in his sleep. Claire leaned her head on Jessie's shoulder. I don't remember the woman I used to be, she said. Jessie took her hand, calloused and warm. You don't have to, she smiled. Because she brought me here? No, he said. Because she didn't stay, you did. It was mid-April when the second rider came. No warning this time, no distant smoke, just hooves on dry earth and the thudding rhythm of someone riding with purpose. Claire saw him first, stepping out from the barn, one hand shading her eyes. Jessie emerged from the tool shed moments later, shotgun resting across his arms, calm but alert. The man was older than the first rider, cleaner cut. His horse was too polished for a drifter, and he wore a long, dark coat that hadn't seen honest work in months. He stopped just outside the gate. You Jessie Markham? Jessie didn't answer right away. That depend on who's asking. The man smiled tightly. My name's Elliot Graves. I'm a lawyer. Claire's stomach turned. Your business? Jessie asked. Graves glanced at Claire. I'm here on behalf of the estate of Mr. Dorian Hale. You may have known him. Claire's blood went cold. Graves continued. Mr. Hale passed 3 weeks ago. Sudden. Stroke, they think. No heirs, except a name written in his personal ledger. He pulled out a folded document. One Miss Clara Evangeline Holt. Claire blinked. That might be me. Jessie stepped closer. What does he want with her now? Graves held out the paper. He left her everything. Later, inside the cabin, Claire sat in stunned silence as Graves explained. Land, money, a deed to a small property in New Mexico, and a letter. Scrawled in fading ink. You took your name back. That's the only reason I respected you. If you ever stop running, let it be your choice, no one else's. D.H. She read the letter twice, then folded it and set it in the fire. It burned fast. You could go, Jessie said gently, watching her from across the room. Claire shook her head. There's nothing I want there. Not even the land? She smiled. I already have land, right here. They rode out the next day. Not to leave, but to mark the line where their claim ended. Together, they hammered in a wooden post, nailed a tin sign to it. M.R., Markham Ranch. Underneath, in hand-carved lettering, another name was etched. Claire, who stayed. That night, under the pale bloom of spring stars, Jessie said softly, You still don't remember who you were. Claire turned to him, hand over his heart. No, she said, But I've never known who I was more than I do right now. Years passed quietly, like wind moving through tall grass, seen only by those who paid attention. The Markham Ranch never became the biggest, never made the papers, but it grew. A few more head of cattle, a new barn roof, a child's laughter echoing off the fence posts in spring. Yes, a child. Claire gave birth to a daughter the next winter. Dark-haired, wide-eyed. They named her Lena, after no one in particular, but somehow the name fit like it had always belonged. Jesse built a cradle from pine he cut himself. Claire painted it blue and sang to Lena in the evenings. No one told them what to do. They figured it out together. Claire never remembered the name she was born with, but she never needed it, because by then she had planted herbs in every window box. She had taught Ella from the neighboring ranch how to ride a horse bareback. She had a ledger of her own, one she filled with family names, mending lists, and quotes she wanted Lena to grow up knowing. You don't need to be found to be whole. Running isn't the same as choosing. Some places don't save you. They give you someone to be. One evening, when Lena was about 4, she asked Jesse, "Daddy, where did Mama come from?" Jesse looked across the porch at Claire, who was sewing by lantern light, and he smiled. "She came from a long way off," he said. "But the best part is, she stayed." The old cottonwood where Jesse found her still stood. Claire visited it every spring, placing a fresh stone at its base. Not to mourn, but to remember, because every story has a turning point. And for Claire, it was the moment someone didn't ask who she used to be. They just gave her warmth, a name to borrow, and the space to become someone better. The cabin never locked its door. The land never stopped blooming. And when the world shifted again, as it always does, there was still a woman who remembered how to fight for her peace. And a man who loved her exactly as she was. No past needed, just the present, and a future they built from nothing.